entitled Bringing Faith Down to Earth. We want to see from the book of James how we can take what is theory and what is doctrine and theology and put it down on a level that we interact with it every single day, that it benefits us and applies to our life every single day. There is no more relevant and down-to-earth and practical book in the Bible than the book of James. And so that's what we're talking about, bringing faith down to earth. The message this morning is entitled The Truth About Temptation. So I'm in James chapter 1. I hope that you'll follow along in some form with me as I read the text. I begin in verse number 13 and read down through verse number 16. So James chapter 1, beginning in verse 13. It says, "Let no one say when he is tempted that I'm being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, and He Himself does not tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he's carried away and enticed by his own lust. Then when lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is accomplished, it brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren." Ray Pritchard is a former pastor. He's retired now. He's an author. I've read several of his books. He pastored a large church near Chicago. He's originally from Russellville. And I was reading one of his writings about James chapter 1, and I ran across this quote of his. And I wanted you to read it just with your eyes. Don't read it out loud. But as I read it, you follow along. You can see it on the screen. He said, "Our spiritual progress is measured not by huge battles won or lost, but by 1,000 daily skirmishes no one else knows about." Our spiritual progress is measured not by huge battles won or lost, but by 1,000 daily skirmishes no one else knows about. We call those daily skirmishes temptation. Temptation. And every single one of us will be visited today by temptation of some sort. And most of us struggle to overcome that temptation when it comes. A daily skirmish. That's a great picture of temptation. The playwright Oscar Wilde, who was certainly no Christian theologian and not even a Christian, said that I can resist everything except temptation. Does that hit us or what? I don't have any trouble. I can resist everything except temptation. How much easier would the Christian life be if it were not for temptation? Our biggest challenge in living the Christian life is overcoming temptation, that 1,000 daily skirmishes that come to us. Temptation is real. It is common. It will be with us until we see Jesus again, one way or the other, so we must learn to deal with it. And here's James, the most down-to-earth book in the New Testament, tells us how to deal with temptation. How can we take on this specter, this ghost of temptation that causes us so much trouble? And so the message this morning, the truth about temptation. Let me show you three things from the text. Number one, I want us to see the certainty of temptation. The certainty of temptation. If someone were to ask you, what is the likelihood that you'll be tempted today? The only correct answer is, it is not likely, it is certain. It is a certainty that you will face temptation today and tomorrow and the next day and the next day after that, on until you see Jesus again. In fact, the only thing that removes the certainty of temptation in your life is to see Jesus, either by your death or His return. That's the only way you're not going to face temptation again. It is an ever-present problem for us. Notice, in fact, that when James talks about temptation here, he says, when you face temptation. He uses that word twice in verse 13 and verse 14. When you face temptation. Not if, but when. There's a certainty about when. When have we seen this distinction before? Well, in the first few verses of chapter 1, we were talking about trials. We were talking about the suffering that comes to us. And James said there, it is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. And now a few verses later, he says when it comes to temptation, the temptation to sin, it's not a matter of if you will be tempted, it is a matter of when you will be tempted. We all face temptation. The Westminster Confession that our Presbyterian friends are so familiar with, they have a statement in that says this: the Christian, from the point of conversion through to the point of seeing Christ and being made like Him, is involved in a continual and irreconcilable war. Do you know that right this moment and every moment of today you're in a continual and irreconcilable war? That war is within yourself. That war is the battle with temptation, the temptation to sin. Now, the hopeful in us, or the devil's advocate within us, would say, yes, but can't we maybe hope to someday reach a point of spiritual maturity where temptation is no longer an issue for us? And sadly, the answer is no. You may get to a point in your life spiritually where temptations change and they're maybe not as powerful, and you, with God's help, do better at overcoming, but you, no matter how mature you are, will never get to the point where you no longer face temptation. Why is that? Well, it's because of this thing within you, inside of you and inside of me, called our sin nature, our fallen nature. We all have one, even if we're redeemed, even if we know Jesus and worship and serve Him. But we inherited fallen nature from our first parents, Adam and Eve. As Christians, we've been forgiven of our sin. We have the power to overcome sin with God's help, but still there is within us the propensity to sin and to give in to temptation because of this fallen nature that we have that we cannot get away from. Somebody said that after we're saved, that sin no longer reigns in our life, but it does remain in our life. It is an ever-present problem because of our sin nature. And we never shed that. Now, that's not an excuse to sin. Did you hear me? Just because I've got a sin nature and I'll always be tempted is not an excuse to sin. Just say, well, you know, it's always there. I'll just give in. No, that's not what that means. But temptation is real, even as mature Christians. Paul, in his mature form, right? As a mature Christian, Paul said, he said that the good things that I want to do, I don't do. And the sin that I despise, that I don't want to do, I still do. Paul, even as a mature Christian, struggled because of his fallen nature. Robert Murray McCheyne said, I have discovered, listen to this quote, it'll hit you right in the heart. I have discovered that the seed of every known sin dwells in my heart. Please don't argue with that thought. Please do not find yourself on the opposite side of that thought that the seed of every known sin doesn't dwell in your heart, because it does, and it dwells in my heart because of our fallen nature. As long as we have a sin nature, we're vulnerable to temptation. So there is a certainty. There's a certainty about temptation for all of us, no matter how mature we are or how old we are. You would think maybe I get to be 80 years old. Temptation is no problem. That's not true. I heard about an 80-year-old who was talking to some younger guys, and they said, well, surely, old guy, temptation is not a problem for you. And he said, no, it is still a problem for me. I'm just smart enough to realize it, right? It never gets to where it's not a problem. So there is the certainty of temptation. The second thing I want to show you is the source of temptation. If we're going to overcome, if we're going to defeat, if we're going to deal successfully with temptation, we need to know where it comes from. Where does it start? Where does it have its origin? And James tells us that here. In fact, he schools us in this question. And he's very clear and he's very blunt, as he often is, with no room for debate. James will tell us here, watch me, where temptation does not come from, and he will tell us where it does come from. In fact, look in verse 13 for the first part of this. He says, look at it. let no one say when he's tempted, I'm being tempted by God. Now that's one of the imperatives that populate the book of James. James is known for the number of imperatives, and this is one of those. In other words, it's a command. It's a strongly worded command. There's an exclamation point or three after this statement. And so what James is saying is, listen to me, church, do not blame God for your temptation. Do not blame God for your sin. Don't do it, James says. Don't even think about doing it. And the sense of the word, the tense is, they were already doing it. And James says, stop it. Stop blaming God for your sin. Don't do it. So, the idea is our temptation is not God's fault. That is not the source. And that might sound far-fetched to you, but it's not as rare as it might seem, because we do have this natural tendency to blame others, don't we? For our problems and our sins and the things that we do, we naturally want to shift the responsibility for something, for someone else. If you have 2 children, you understand this. If you have 2 children, you understand the propensity to blame others. Because whenever you ask one of them, who did this? Who broke the lamp? Who poured the milk out in the floor? Who spray painted the dog? Anytime you ask one of them that, they're going to point to the other one and say, he did it, right? Now, your children didn't start that. They may have perfected it, but that started all the way back. Guess who? Adam and Eve, right? That started with Adam and Eve, this propensity to blame others. After Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, God called them to account for that. He asked them to answer for that sin. Adam said, this is a loose translation, but listen to me. Adam said to God, that woman that you gave me caused me to sin. It's not my fault, it's her fault, and it's partly your fault. Now, I've been married a long time, as I told someone a while ago. That was a long car ride home, wasn't it, for Adam? He threw her under the bus, right? God, it's not my fault, it's her fault. And by the way, God, you gave her to me to start with, so it's kind of your fault too. That's what Adam said. Eve said, it's not my fault, the serpent, God, that by the way, you created, the serpent deceived me. So it's not my fault at all. It's the serpent's fault, and by extension, your fault. We have been playing the blame game for a long time. We do that when it comes to our sin. It looks like this in our lives. Are y'all paying attention? This is painful. It looks like this. We blame our parents. We blame our parents. We blame our upbringing. We blame the lack of godly examples in our home. We blame a bad home life. We blame our friends who get us involved in sinful behaviors and bad habits. We blame our circumstances and our surroundings. We blame our environment. We blame lack of opportunity. We blame poverty. We blame a lack of education. We say, I was born this way. I can't help it. This is the way God made me. I just have this gene in me. I can't help it. I was born for this. We blame everything and everyone we can think of except the real culprit. But the fact is, God, hear me, church, does not try to get us to sin. He never does. That's what the Bible says. That goes against His nature, and it goes against His love for us. Now, we saw in verses 3 and 4 that God does allow trials to come to your life. God will allow suffering, but what is the point of trials and suffering? So that we mature and grow stronger in our faith. But that's not what temptation is about. The point of temptation is not growth, but destruction, and God would never set out to destroy us. God does not tempt us to sin. It goes against His nature. God is not running some kind of undercover operation to draw you into a trap, to make you sin, so that He can say, aha, I knew it. That is not God's nature. He wants our good and our growth, not our downfall and our destruction. How ludicrous it is For us to blame God for our sin, that only shows that we don't know much about Him. Besides His holiness, His whole other sermon, His holiness would never allow Him to be tainted, even by tempting us to sin. And so to those who would say, in James' day and our day, it's not my fault, it's somebody else's fault, James says, just stop it, knock it off. So then, what is the source of our temptation? What is the real problem here? Look at verse 14. You was afraid I was going to get to this verse, didn't you? Look at verse 14. He said, but each one is tempted when he's carried away and enticed by his own lust. The brutal truth is that the problem with me, hear me church, is me. The problem with sin in my life is me. It's not God's fault. It's not even the devil's fault. It's not my parents' fault. It's not my friend's fault. It's my fault. I'm the problem. I'm the source of temptation and sin. It's me that causes me to sin. I say this. You can say it about you. I'll say it about me. If I want to know the biggest spiritual problem I have, all I have to do is look in the mirror. And there he is. I am the problem. I'm the problem. Somebody said that every sin is an inside job. It's an inside job. Now, the devil may entice you. The devil may bring opportunities to try to get you to fall, because he does do that. But when it comes right down to it, sin is an inside job, because you still have a choice. And so do I. So the first thing we've got to do to overcome temptation is to realize that it comes from within us, from our flesh and our desires and our sin nature. We make that decision. In fact, I will say this, and you need to know this, jot this verse down. God never allows a temptation to come to you or me without there also being a way out. Did you know that? God never allows you to be tempted that there's not a way out from that temptation. Look at 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13. 1 Corinthians 10, 13. This verse has been twisted in so many ways to say things it doesn't say, but here's what it means. No temptation has overtaken you, but such is common to man. Meaning no, you haven't been tempted in a way that somebody else has not. You're not unique. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. Able what? Able to withstand. But with the temptation will provide the way of escape also, so that you'll be able to endure it. Do you know, with one verse, God says there is no excuse for your sin or mine. With one verse, God says there's always a way out when you're tempted. If you don't see the way out, guess what? It's because you're not looking for it. You know what my problem is too? Can we just get honest? Sometimes I see the way out, and you know what I do? I look this way. I look this way. God always provides a way out. So therefore, I cannot say I didn't have a choice. I always have a choice, because God is faithful. He keeps His word. And if a temptation comes to you from your flesh, God's going to provide a way out of that. I'm the problem then. It's me. So stop blaming others. Stop blaming God. Stop blaming your circumstances and your environment and your hard times and bad parents and suspect genetics, and take the first step of overcoming temptation, and that is know where it comes from. Right? That's the first step. So we've seen the certainty of temptation. We've seen the source of temptation. And then thirdly, I want you to see the progression of temptation. The progression. Did you know that temptation has a predictable pattern? It has a predictable progression in how it starts and how it moves and what the end result is. There is a progression for how temptation works. And James tells us that. And by the way, if you look in verse 14, that's where we see it start. He said each one. When he says each one is tempted, that really means each one is specifically tempted. And what that means is you and I can be tempted in different ways. Do you know that what's a temptation to you might not be to me? You might really struggle every day, all day with the same thing. I would have no problem with that temptation at all. But what I struggle with probably wouldn't be an issue for you. So we need to be careful We need to be careful about assuming things about other people's temptation because we're all tempted in different ways. Each one is tempted in a different way. So you see in verse 14, look at it. Each one is tempted when he's carried away and enticed by his own lust. So here's the progression. Here's where it starts. It starts with lust. And I really don't like the translation of the word lust there. I really like the word desire better. And some other translations use the word. The connotation of lust is always bad. The idea here in the original is a natural desire. It is a natural desire that we have, something that is neutral sometimes, not necessarily evil or bad. Desires are not necessarily sinful, they're natural. For instance, God gives us all the desire for food, right? Thankfully. The desire for food is not the problem. It's how we fulfill that desire that's the problem, right? Exhibit A. I'm the problem with that too, right? It's just a natural desire. God gives us a natural desire for pleasure. That's not the problem. It's how we fulfill it. That's the problem. God gives us the desire for physical intimacy. The desire is not the problem. It's how we fulfill it that is the problem. That's how it becomes sin. It's when we when we abandon God's plan for fulfilling our natural desires to seek our own way, that's when we have a problem. That's when it becomes sin. You understand what I'm saying? It's not just lust. It's a desire that has overcome its boundaries. Somebody says our desire is like the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River is powerful, but as long as it stays within its banks, it's okay, right? No problem. But when it overruns its banks, then that's the problem, right? That's our desires. As long as they stay within the bounds of God's plan, it's not a problem. It's when they break through that there's an issue. And so it starts with the desire, with a lust. And look back in the verse, look at verse 14. It says, he's carried away and enticed. Carried away and enticed. That phrase comes from the world of fishing, oddly enough, enticed. And the picture here is that the fisherman takes the hook and puts bait on it, right? I'm not much of a fisherman. I used to when I was younger with my dad, but I know enough about fishing. You're probably not going to be successful if you just throw a bare hook into the water. Now, you might get lucky, but if you just throw a bare hook into the water, you're probably not going to be successful. What do? You camouflage, you hide the hook with something that looks good to the fish, that looks like food. A worm, a minnow, a frog, or whatever it is. You put something attractive on the hook to entice the fish, watch me, to overlook the hook. Because if all the fish sees is the hook, he's probably not going to bite. Now that's the idea of what happens with our desires, with our lust, as our mind starts working. Fish are dumb, but they're not so dumb that they'll bite a hook. They have to have some enticement. Why does the fish bite? Well, he thinks he's getting a free meal. And then he becomes the free meal, right? He's enticed and he sees the bait and he ignores the hook. How do we get hooked? How do we get caught? How do we get entrapped by sin? How do we fall to temptation? We ignore the hook and take the bait. The enemy doesn't dangle a bare hook in front of us, Christians. He puts bait on it. The enemy doesn't dangle the danger in front of us and expect us to go for it. He puts something attractive to cover up the hook that looks enticing, that looks good, so that we'll bite it, and then we're hooked, we're caught, and we're on our way to destruction. You understand? You get a picture there? Hey, it's nothing. It's just an innocent conversation. It's just a phone call or a message. There's nothing to it. We're old friends. It's innocent. That's the bait. That's the bait. But the hook is adultery, maybe, unfaithfulness, destroyed marriage and family, untold pain, heartache. Hey, let's just go out and have some fun. It's just a few drinks with friends, no big deal. Everybody's doing it. Don't you see all the happy and the pretty people in the commercials doing it? That's the bait. But the hook is not shown. The destroyed lives is not shown. Why? Because nobody bite the hook. Hey, it's just a few dollars. Just fudge the numbers on your expense report. Everybody's doing it. Do you see the billions of dollars this corporation has? Just fudge your numbers. It's just a few $100s here and there. That's the bait. The hook. That's the pain and the heartache that happens when you go for it, right? There's the hook and there's the bait. How do we fall for sin? We see the bait and not the hook. The best time to defeat temptation is in the first stage. The best time to defeat temptation is when we consider doing something that we know is against God's will. And I recognize the bait for what it is, that it's simply hiding the hook. Watch me, church. And I stop, I take a step back, and I say, this ain't for me. I find a place to pray. I pull open the Scriptures. I call a trusted friend, and I say, please help me before I do something I'll regret later. The easiest place to stop temptation is in the beginning of the progression. But if I ignore that, then we go on to verse 15. When lust has conceived, in other words, I say, I'm doing it, right? You got it, verse 15? I'm doing it. That gives birth to sin. What is sin? Sin is when I take the thing that I've been thinking about in my mind, I've been mulling it over, I've been meditating on it and contemplating it, and I actually do it. See, temptation is not the sin. It is the sinning that's the sin. It's the action that's the sin. That's the next step. That's the next step. I actually sin. I know it's wrong. I'm going to do it anyway. And then if you go on in verse 15, you see the last step in the progression. When sin is accomplished, or when it finishes what it's going to do to us, what does it say? It brings forth death. What's the progression? I think about it. It's in my mind. It looks good, right? It looks like a worm. I know there might be a hook behind there, but look, I'm thinking about it. And then I take the next step and I do it. And before it's all over with, the last step is death. Death. Physical death, spiritual death, loss, heartache, hurt, loss of joy, loss of satisfaction, loss of witness and influence and ministries. You can die a lot of ways and your heart still be beating. But death comes because of sin. Yes, there's temporary pleasure in sin, but the road always leads to death. That's the progression. Think about it. If I don't stop it right then, if I don't find something else to do, some way to short circuit the progress, I sin. And death is inevitable. I couldn't help, as I worked on this week, but think about King David standing on the rooftop looking at Bathsheba as she bathed. He didn't go out there for that. It wasn't an intentional thing. But it illustrates the progression of sin because he knew it was wrong to keep looking. He could have stopped before it got to the action point. David, he was looking, and soon looking became lusting, and lust turned into action. Here's David. Hey, go find out who she is. What's her name? Bring her here. Oh, she's married? Don't worry about it. We'll take care of that later. See the bait? He took the bait, didn't he? He took the bait. Do you think, hear me, do you think that if David knew in that moment that his son would die as a result of that sin, that he would have gone through with it? I doubt it. I doubt it. Do you think if David knew that forever after that he would be labeled an adulterer and a murderer, that he would have gone through with that? I highly doubt it. Do you think if David knew the depth of despair and depression and pain and heartache he would endure, and the fact that he would lose the joy of his salvation, that he would have gone through that? I doubt it. You see, if David had seen the hook instead of the bait, he would have said no. What a lesson in that for us. If David would have turned away and got those Old Testament scriptures out and said, I am going to meditate on the goodness and the awesomeness of God, David would have called his good friend to come and be with him in that temptation. I wonder as I stand here in front of you as a failed, flawed sinner myself, if we could just see the hook behind the bait, if we'd say no a lot more than we do. I wonder if before I take the next step of thinking about something to actually doing it, if I could see the next step of the pain and the heartache and the death it'll cause. I wonder if I could stop it right here before it gets there. You see, that's how we overcome it. That's how we overcome it, is to see where it leads. To see where it leads. Young Joseph did that. Young Joseph was enticed by a beautiful woman who could have done lots of things for his career, but he said, I'm not going down that road because I see where it's leading. I challenge all of you to think about this the next time temptation comes knocking. Oh, it's no big deal, but where could it lead? Everybody's doing it, yeah, but I'm the one that's got to pay for it. It looks so good, yeah, but that's just the bait. What about the hook beneath the bait? That's the truth about temptation right there. There's always death. There's always a hook. Never forget that. I want you to bow with me. Father, help us to be strengthened by your word. Help us to see the end from the beginning. Help us to see the hook behind the bait so that we, Father God, would say no, that we'd short-circuit the progression, that we'd stop before it's too late, that we'd depend on you to help us, oh God. Help us in that, Lord, in our walk with you. And I ask you to help us and strengthen us in Jesus' name. Would you stand with me, please, just a moment? We're not going to linger long. You know I don't do that. But if you might come this morning and say, Pastor, I've struggled